Shabbat Tov, everyone. Welcome to our Pirke Abot program. I hope everyone is safe and healthy. And as usual, begin by praying for the refuah shelema lechol cholei Amo Yisrael, and especially the sick of our community. Amen. In today's program, we'll be reading from Pirke Abot, Perek Sheni, the second chapter, Mishnayot He and Vav 5 and 6. The Mishnah begins, Mishnah He, with Hu Haya Omer, referring to the author of the previous Mishnah, which you learned on the previous recording, which is the famous Hillel Hazaken, who was the leader of his generation, who is a direct descendant on his mother's side from David HaMelech, and who 7 generations later, his offspring, his lineage, was the Yehuda HaNasi himself, the author of the Mishnah, the first official composition of Torah Sheba'al Peh, of oral law. And Hillel, in this Mishnah, has a sequence of type of people that he refers to. All of them have limitations, either limitations in character, in knowledge, in behavior, in action, and those limitations lead them to limitations in success in life. Let's start with the first few. Hu haya omer, Hillel would be famous to say, En bur yerechet velo am haaretz hasid. Bur literally is someone who is uncultivated. Hachamim speak of someone who is uncultivated in character and very low level in terms of his education and his understanding. And pretty uniformly, the Hachamim, the commentators, explain, attribute the reason to this bur, and it's really and very close to the English translation, boorish, to this person due to his lack of interaction with the world. He's not necessarily out there in the business or professional world. He's not interacting with society. He's not part of a community. And therefore, he's uncultivated. He lacks knowledge. Such a person cannot be yerechet. And am haaretz, fearful of sin. And am haaretz, loosely termed as a layman, cannot be hasid, loosely explained as righteous. Let's go back and explain. So this uncultivated person who lacks knowledge, and specifically knowledge in Torah and Jewish law, he cannot possibly fear sin. And what that means is as follows. Somebody who is part of society, part of a community, he might have a low level, a small bank of knowledge in Torah, and Jewish law, but because he is part of a community, because he interacts with those around him, he can be yerechet. He can be fearful of sin, meaning he can be watchful and refrain from the basic restrictions of Jewish law and the Torah demands of us. For instance, he knows enough without being that educated to not eat that, to not go there, to refrain from doing that on Shabbat. That he can definitely inculcate in his regular life. However, the bur, because of the fact that it doesn't have the opportunity and the exposure to learn from others, first of all, his character will be completely unrefined, and his ability to behave properly in the Torah perspective, it will be much less possible. And also, and especially, because of the fact that he doesn't hear and see and observe others, won't even know how to refrain from the basic restrictions demanded of us by the Torah. Now we turn to the am haaretz. Again, loosely translated as layman. Some people use it as more of a derogatory term, but it's really referring to the average person, you can say. Am haaretz literally means he's part of a large group of those who are in the artist, those who are part of society. However, it does refer to someone who's limited in his knowledge and his education, simply because he just doesn't normally strive on a regular basis to enrich and to grow and to advance his Torah learning, his knowledge of Jewish law, and therefore his ability to observe Torah and Mitzvot. Am haaretz, we're told by Hillel, cannot be a hasid. Righteous is usually the English translation used, but it's really referring to the fact that such a person who is lacking his Jewish education, his Torah education, cannot reach heights. He limits himself. He can't reach heights in being meticulous and observant of Mitzvot. He cannot advance the refinement of his midot, of his character traits, and in general, can't really become a complete Aved Hashem, servant of God, because of the fact that he lacks Jewish education. Torah education is everything. And although sometimes we feel we are good Jews, and we are, because we act properly and we do our best and we have good intent, but goodness and acting through logic and rationale is a completely relative term. It's relative to the society that you live in and to the era, the time, the century that you live in. And in a given time and place, what's good, what's logical, what's rational can be completely different. The only real goodness, the only absolute logic, the only absolute truth can be found in God and his Torah, Torah Kedusha. And therefore, for us to really reach completion and heights in our observance of God and our meticulous following of the mitzvot and our ability to strive and reach self-growth in our character traits, one must be educated, cannot be an Am Ha'aretz. Speaking of Torah, the Mishnah, Hillel, goes on to say the next two limited type of people. V'lo ha'baishan lamed, v'lo ha'kapedan melamed. Literally means the person who is ashamed can't learn, and the person who's particular cannot teach. These are two great lessons in education. I witness them every day of my life, in both in yeshiva and in Bet Knesset. Even though it is normally a praiseworthy way of carrying ourselves to be low-key, to be modest and humble. However, when it comes to learning, the study of Torah, to advancing our Torah knowledge, there is no such thing as being ashamed. There is no such thing as feeling a lower self-esteem or less confidence. Our job is to learn. And the only way we can learn is by being curious and to asking questions and making sure we understand. And if we don't understand it the first time, we ask again, and a second, or 5 or 10 times. This person isn't helping us, we ask somebody else. Because that's the only way that we can possibly facilitate our own self-growth. And if the response comes on the other side, enough, Hajj. According to the laws of Talmud Torah stated in the Rambam and Shulchan Aruch, the learner's response and reaction should be Torahi. This is Torah, and it's my Torah, and my obligation, my godly responsibility is to learn, and for that I need to ask. So never stop asking, never be embarrassed. The flip side of that very same coin is Lo ha'kapedan melamed. The particular person, the person who lacks patience, is not fit to be the melamed, to be the teacher. And by the way, one of the first things that I tell my younger 9th or 10th grade classes in high school, on the first day of school is, Lo ha'baishan lamed, never ever be afraid to ask. Ask 10 times, but then I have to do my job. My job is to answer 10 times over. Because the educator, the teacher, and this could be also a parent at home, obviously, at any level, in any setting, has to know that there are all different types of learners. There are visual learners, there are audio learners. There are those who process more quickly. There are those who process a little more slowly than others. And we have to be sensitive to that. We have to be conscious of the fact that everyone is designed differently by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And in order to accommodate and facilitate the learning of others and the understanding of others, and that is a great prestige and a very fortunate position to be in, to educate other Jews in Torah knowledge, one must be patient, one can't be particular, and just like he who wants to learn must ask 10 times if he has to, one who is teaching and has that fortunate position of teaching Torah must teach and explain over and over and over again. Continuing on Hillel's discussion regarding Torah, he says, "V'lo chol hamarbeh b'shora mahkim." Not all who are abundantly engaged in commerce and business can grow his knowledge, his Torah knowledge, to a great extent. Of course, the Torah encourages one to support himself and to find a trade and a profession, and looks highly upon such a person, and a person that can balance that with his Torah study on a regular, consistent basis is very praiseworthy. However, there must be limitations. One who is, we have to take care of ourselves and our families, but one who is completely engulfed in his profession and his business and his livelihood, one who sometimes gets carried away, doesn't realize how much time is being spent in it, that person will find himself being very limited in his Torah growth. Torah, Jewish law, Jewish knowledge is a vast, unending ocean. And for us to engage in it and to grow ourselves, we must be able to have consistent Torah study times. And for one who is not drawing lines and placing limitations on himself and his livelihood and in the way that he occupies himself in the rest of his day, he's going to lose the opportunity of being able to grow in that Torah, because days turn into weeks, weeks turns into months, and so on. And before you know it, we lose great opportunities. We have to have limitations and draw lines. And finally, one of my most favorite proverbs in Pirke Abot by Hillel, by anyone, is b'makom she'en anashim tishtadel lihiyot ish. In a place, if there are not men or people, literally, try to become a person. What does that mean? On one hand, there are numerous explanations to this. One explanation is that if someone or the people, the society around you, there aren't enough people that are stepping up to the plate, that are serving the community, that are becoming part of chesed, of a communal service in the synagogue, in the yeshiva, well, then step up to the plate and literally try to make an effort to be an ish, be the man, because no one else is doing it. You have to try to do it. Also, this speaks of someone who might be excelling, and you might be on the top of your class. You might be a bigger hacham than anyone. You might be the top of your profession, and you feel like, en anashim, there's no one really to look up to because I'm it. This is the commentary of Rabbi Yonah. Keep trying to be a person. Never stop striving for self-growth and for knowledge, and never think that you've reached the height and the limit. But my favorite way of looking at this proverb in the Mishnah is regarding justice. In a situation where en anashim, where you see injustice around you, where you see lack of truth around you, hishtadel lihiyot ish. Try your best. Don't be afraid. Stand out. Take initiative and stand up for what's right, for what's true, and mete out justice the proper way, the proper time and place, but don't be afraid to move forward and do such a thing. You should know that the word ish is referring to always a person of prestige, a person who's a role model, a person we look up to. It's spoken about Moshe Rabbeinu, the Ha'ish Moshe Anav Me'od. We read it about Mordechai in the last Megillah that we read on Purim, Ish Yehudi, Hayab Shushan Habirah Shmo Mordechai, and the upcoming Megillah that we're going to read, Ish Gibur Hayil, and that person was referring to Boaz. So Ish were the greatest people in our nation. And if you look around and you see that that great person doesn't seem to be stepping up to the plate in a moment of truth, in a moment where justice needs to be carried out, then you be that great person. Then you step up to the plate. And in fact, regarding Moshe Rabbeinu, it does say that when he looked around and he saw the Jew being beaten by the Egyptian, he looked around, Vayatki en ish. There wasn't a person that was taking it to an independent initiative and stepping up to the plate and saying, if no one else is doing the right thing, well, then I'm going to do it. Be an ish. Second Mishnah is very short. It's an analogy by Hillel, and really it's meant to teach us one thing, and that is about the just behavior of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It sounds a little graphic. Hillel saw a skull floating on top of the water. Amar la. Hillel spoke to that skull and he says follows. Al de'ataft etfuch besof mitifayich hitufun. Because you drowned, seemingly, because you drowned others. And those who drowned you are going to be drowned as well. On one hand, the simple surface level understanding of this Mishnah, the lesson is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu works in measure for measure. He has perfect justice, and he will punish and mete out justice properly to those who deserve whatever they deserve and whatever iniquity and wrongdoing they transgressed upon. There's other ways to look at this Mishnah as well. For instance, some Hachamim say that this is speaking of the fact that someone might have deserved to die and deserved to be killed. But those who killed you, perhaps they were too zealous. Perhaps they took the law into their own hands and we have a justice system. So while you might have been deserved to get killed and you got killed in the end, but the perpetrators of your death, who were too zealous and took things into their own hand, went above the law, also will be treated similarly because they are maybe just as guilty as you are, doing something beyond the law, not trusting our court system. But finally, and the way that I like to explain this Mishnah the most, is that this answers a lot of questions for us that very often disturb us in the world around us. And that is that we see victims and we see perpetrators, and life just doesn't seem to be fair. Where's the justice? Of course, we know the ultimate philosophical question that we have, that it seems to be that there is evil done to the good and good done to the evil. But we know that in the final say, the ultimate judge and the ultimate court, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself, is the one that serves, metes out, and conducts perfect justice in this world. And we know that all victims and all perpetrators will end up getting the exact fate that they deserve, and we trust HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And therefore, when Hillel saw this skull floating on the water, he said, you know what? It seems like you got something coming to you, and it seems like those who did this to you really are walking away scot-free. We trust Hashem. We trust the consequences that we see. And we know that although it's very confusing sometimes in life, ultimate justice will always be served by the ultimate creator with infinite wisdom. Shavua Tov. I wish you a wonderful, health, and safe week.